Welcome to the webinar, Hazmat Carrier Crunch, Finding Capacity and Sanity in a Tight Market. My name is Joe Lynch. I'm the host, and the presenter today is Kevin Ball from BM2 Freight. So I think this is going to be a great webinar. Kevin is extremely knowledgeable on this topic. I will be probably adding my 2 cents, which will more or less be your questions. So if you do have questions, please send them to me, and let's hand it off to Kevin Ball.
Joe, thank you. Hey, everybody. As Joe said, I'm a co-owner and co-founder of BM2 Freight Services. We're located in the Cincinnati area in northern Kentucky. We're a non-asset-based 3PL, and we focus on full truckload freight all over the 48 states, as well as Canada and Mexico. As a company, we have 3 primary focuses: hazmat, government freight, and food transportation. Today we're going to focus on hazmat. And one last thing, our company's been around. In January, we will be celebrating our 10th anniversary. So thank you for dialing and tuning in, and hopefully you can get something out of this. As far as our agenda goes, we're going to go over some hazmat definitions and go over some classes. We'll talk about some statistics about the industry. From then, we're going to talk about the capacity crunch and the reasons for that crunch. And then finally, we'll talk about how to find capacity and thus sanity in the marketplace, hence the reason for the whole webinar to begin with. And then with that, we'll talk about best practices when you're looking for carrier partners. So definitions of hazmat. There are several different definitions of hazmat, and they're all defined differently by different governing bodies. It's interesting that the publication Hazardous Materials Management, hazardous materials are defined and regulated in the United States primarily by laws and regulations administered by the U.S. EPA, OSHA, which is the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the DOT, and the NRC, which is the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So there's not one overall governing body. You have 4 different bodies that have their own definitions of hazmat. Today we're just going to go over a few of them. So according to OSHA, they define hazmat as A, chemicals that are carcinogens, B, chemicals that are combustible liquids, compressed gases, explosives, flammable liquids, solids, organic peroxides, oxidizers, pyrophorics. For those that don't know, pyrophorics is defined as objects that are capable of igniting spontaneously by air. Okay, and then chemicals that are reactive or water reactive. And then their third definition is chemicals that in the course of normal handling, use, or storage may produce or release dust, gases, fumes, vapors, or smoke. Okay. And then the CFR, which is the Code of Federal Regulations, they define, and this is what you see primarily on trucks, 9 different classes of hazardous material. Class 1 is explosives, Class 2 is gases, Class 3 is flammable and combustible liquids, Class 4 is flammable solids, Class 5 is oxidizers and organic peroxides, Class 6 is toxins and infectious substances, Class 7 is radioactive, Class 8 is corrosive, and Class 9 is miscellaneous. So those are the pictures. We showed you the pictures of the placards and the labels as it applies to labels and placards on any hazmat shipment. The placards, they're the bigger ones. They go on the outside of any trailer hauling hazmat, and then similar labels must be affixed to the product itself. And that's a rule from the FMCSA and the DOT. So here's some stats about the market. First of all, my little joke is, they say 74.3 statistics are made up on the spot. We tried to go the extra mile here, so we're going to cite some sources, but just to give you guys a little bit of insight into what the hazmat transportation market looks like. All right, the 5 main modes of hauling hazmat is truck, pipeline, rail, waterways, and air. Truck is by far the most common form of transportation for hazmat. So some statistics I didn't list on here that I'll share with you just to illustrate that. Explosives, Class 1, according to the CFR, 87% of explosives are moved by truck as compared to pipeline, rail, or waterways. Gas is 60.2%. Class 5 oxidizers, 74.3% moves by truck. Corrosive, 75.5% of corrosive hazmat runs by truck. I can go through all of those with you. The point there is, of all those 5 main modes of transportation for hazmat, trucking is by far the most prevalent, and hence why we're having this conversation today. Other statistics, in pure tonnage, 4 of the top 10 commodities that were hauled on U.S. highways, according to the 2012 census, were hazardous. As it applies to dollar amounts, 3 out of the top 10 commodities hauled on U.S. highways were hazardous. On a pure tonnage basis, hazardous materials make up 19% of all freight shipped. So to put that in perspective, for every 5 trucks that are on the road, 1 of them is hauling hazmat. So it's a very big market. Another interesting statistic, compared to 1975 when they started tracking it, hazmat-related highway fatalities, and this is hazmat only, the number was 27 in 1975, and in 2016 it was 8. Okay, so that says further numbers say that 2% of all hazmat incidents in 2012 were on the highway. The rest, and this will keep coming back to this, the vast majority of property damage in hazmat shipments is loading and unloading. Okay, it's important to know as we talk about the capacity crunch that we'll get into later. What are the most commonly transported hazardous materials? First is natural gas, coke, and asphalt. And when you see the coke there, it's not Coca-Cola, although Coca-Cola probably should be considered hazardous. And coke isn't obviously the other coke, because I don't think there's any trucks that want to haul that. The load value itself would probably be way too high. But no, coke is defined as a type of fuel that's a byproduct of coal. So natural gas, coke, asphalt, gasoline, crude petroleum, fuel oils, and cleaning solutions are the most commonly transported hazardous materials. So what are some common problems that are associated with hazmat shipments? First of all, carriers and drivers need to be meticulous in following protocol. Hauling hazmat is not like hauling drywall or hauling pallets of paper, where the driver just gets in and goes and is worried about windshield time and obeying traffic laws and obeying the ELDs and their log books. They cannot cut corners, so they need to spend just as much time paying attention to the detail on the protocols, that's just as important as their safe driving habits. That's not the case with all shipments, but it is very much the case with refrigerated shipments and hazmat shipments. Going back to the statistic about most of the occurrences being on loading or unloading, that speaks to the first point too. You know, unloading, the paperwork, the regulations, the record keeping by the drivers and the shippers all have to be on point, and that's more so with hazmat shipments than there are on regular shipments. Packaging errors, it goes along the same. So what do you need to be qualified to be a hazmat carrier? And the interesting thing is the US DOT does not require or does not have a specific certification or their own licensing. They contract with different training companies. Their qualifications are merely that, not merely, it's important, but the driver has to have a minimum of 3 years of a perfect driving record. The driver must pass a written test the driver must undergo and successfully complete a TSA background check, and the driver must undergo periodic retraining. That's it, and there's not one governing body. So one particular company is Lion Technology. They offer hazmat driver training, but there are several others out there. Other driver and carrier qualifications.
Kevin, do you think they'll be...
Go ahead.
Good, quick question, Kevin. Do you think at some point that the DOT will end up having some sort of separate license on this?
Probably. You know, I mean, that's the trend in the industry anyway, with, you know, ELDs is becoming a DOT mandated thing. I would assume that within the next 5 years that they're going to mandate the exact type of qualification. Right.
Given the importance, I can see why they'd want to do that.
Absolutely. Make sure it's an apples-to-apples comparison, and there's a standard across the industry. There are other certifications out there. There's a tanker endorsement, and we see hazmat shipments that don't require a tanker endorsement, and we also see non-hazardous shipments that do require a tanker endorsement, but more often than not, they go hand in hand. There's also HACCP, which it stands for Hazardous Analysis and Critical Control Points. They offer a certification. That's not mandated by the DOT, but it's considered a strong recommendation. The carriers are HACCP certified. And then there are also other carrier and driver qualifications through different trade groups. For example, the NACD, which is the National Association of Chemical Distributors, they have a certification that's very stringent, and that's traditional more on the company end and less on the driver end. But, you know, the main qualifications are those, but there are several out there to be able to be qualified and certified as far as hauling hazmat. So let's talk about the carrier crunch. Everybody's seen it, and it's certainly not specific to the hazmat market, but it does hit hazmat harder than it hits other markets, and that kind of goes back to the fact that the extra care and the specialized needs that the hazmat shipments require. The saying I like to use is that when trucking capacity catches a cold, hazmat trucking capacity catches pneumonia. It's going to hit that market harder. So why are we having this crunch? Several reasons. One, it's, you know, hard to find a driver, truck, or carrier. That's what the tight market looks like. What else does a tight market mean? You're unable to support the timing of your shippers. And I know we have carriers on here, and I know we have brokers on this call, and I know we have shippers on this call, but it affects everybody the same. If you're a shipper, you have customers, and your customers give you deadlines on when they want that product, and when it's a tight market, that puts that in jeopardy. If you're a broker, you're having the same problem. The customers that are giving you freight, they have due dates, and when it's hard to find a truck, you know, it makes it harder to meet the needs of your customers. You're going to find loads get dropped, and the carriers...
Kevin, if I could add something into that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I work with a lot of small 3PLs, and I used to run a little 3PL, and if you don't have a lot of hazmat shipments, or you just a onesie, twosie, boy, the hazmat carriers just seem to want to ignore you. I've had that feeling, and other smaller carriers, smaller brokers and shippers have felt it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
I know you probably felt it a long time ago.
We did. We started out, like I said, we're about 10 years old, and when we started out, our hazmat volume certainly wasn't what it is now, and you know that kind of put us, for lack of better words, at the bottom of the food chain, right? So the carriers we would contract with, they would fall out on our loads to take care of their more established brokers or shippers that they dealt with. More established, higher volume. So for small shippers and brokers, that happens more in a constrained or a tight market. And then what else happens in a tight market? Unexpected price increases and price volatility. And that's simple economics 101. It's a supply and demand. You know, when the supply of trucks goes down, that it flips the supply and demand curve and it raises the prices. And it's, you know, it's not rocket science, but that's exactly what happens. So what is causing that crunch? Why are we having a carrier shortage right now? When we talk about this, the carrier shortage capacity crunch, we have three areas of concern, right? Economic reasons, lifestyle reasons, and regulatory reasons. So, economic reasons, the economy started to turn around a little bit, and what that means is two things. Number one, there's more freight being shipped. So supply and demand, even if the truck supply stayed the same, the demand for trucks would go up, and it would still have that same effect on pricing. Okay, and then the other thing is that drivers leave the field for better opportunities. So sometimes in economic downturns, we see that people in the trades, whether it be plumbers or electricians that find themselves out of work, will become truck drivers to make ends meet and support their family. And then when the economy turns back around, they'll go back to their trades. Joe, I think it was you that was telling me about a friend of yours or a colleague of yours that was a lawyer who did that when the
right.
economy was down, right?
08 and 09, he drove a truck.
Right, and then so that's an economic factor that people are leaving the industry. Another economic factor that people don't talk about, but it is out there, is that you know, truck drivers make good money, but their income is reduced just by the lifestyle of living on the road, which is more expensive. And here's kind of my point to that. So there's a study I read in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, and it says that convenience stores charge 11% more than grocery stores, and grocery stores charge 10 to 12% more than supercenters, mass merchandisers like super Walmarts, for example. So when you combine one barcode item from a Walmart supercenter where you can shop when you're not living on the road versus at a convenience store or a truck stop, you're going to pay 22% more, which really adds up when you're living that lifestyle on the road and every good you buy costs that much more. It really does add up.
Yeah, and there's sometimes some unreimbursed costs too. I know of some truckers who said they end up paying for a hotel that's unreimbursed, which is obviously no fun.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So there was hurricane damage, and that was in the first part of quarter three. And if you've been paying attention to the industry, it did. It wreaked havoc on supply, demand, capacity, and pricing for a couple months. And even though that started to right itself and we've started to see it correct, then the just general yearly fourth quarter spike in business kind of offset that. So when you combine those two, that helps cause the carrier shortage from an economic perspective. From a lifestyle perspective, aging drivers not being replaced by the younger generation. Look, I'm not going to take time here and rail on the millennial generation right now. A couple reasons. One, I think it's a crutch to blame everything on millennials, and second, it's not always fair and not always accurate. But the truth of the matter is that the younger generation is not entering the truck driving field. So as you get the older generation of drivers that are aging out, they're not being replaced by the younger drivers in enough supply to be able to keep the same supply-demand curve going. Another one is the traction of the open road is largely gone. The truck drivers almost had, in some circles, the same kind of allure as cowboys of the Old West, right, where you could be your own boss, and that doesn't mean as much anymore, and not as much as it used to. Low prestige position. Trucking was never considered a prestigious job at all, or not trying to say that, but it was also balanced out by the notion that there was a certain level of independence and self-determination, and wheels ain't turning, you ain't earning, and just the lone wolf mentality. And then a lack of women represented in the field. So, it's interesting right now, there are more women than there ever have been as truck drivers, but the ratio is still lower than the normal workforce average. Regulatory causes of the carrier shortage, increased scrutiny of driver safety, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the third bullet point there, the ELDs, which are going into effect in 12 days, and they're not going to start enforcing it until April, but that's all anybody in the industry has been talking about for the past year, and it's scaring carriers away from buying more assets, and it's scaring drivers away from entering the industry. Increased drug testing and legalized marijuana. So what that means is, like with alcohol, you can, when you're off duty and you're at home, you can have a couple beers and it's fine. And even in states where marijuana is illegal, drivers still can't ever have it in their system ever, or they're going to lose their license. Also, there was a Transport Topics article this week that says on January 1st the DOT is going to start testing for synthetic opioids, and what those are painkillers that are prescribed by your doctor, but just because it's prescribed by your doctor and not taken illegally can still trigger a positive test and could put your status of your driver's license status in jeopardy. So there are certain regulatory issues.
Hey, I got a quick question from Kathy over at FedEx, and she says, what was the name of that test? I don't know if you have the test, or maybe you could just share with her what.
The synthetic opioids test. Yeah, I can share the article. I have it pulled up actually on my on one of my web pages on my computer. So Kathy, afterwards I can, if I have your contact information, I can just flip that to you in an email. Thumbs up or. Oh,
she actually she says she's interested in the legislation. So yeah, Kevin can send you the article after. Kathy. We have your email.
Okay. Are we good? Move forward, Joe?
Yep.
Okay. Very good. So, all that said, we've defined what hazardous materials are. We've defined, talked a little bit about the statistics about the industry and what a constrained market looks like and what's causing it. So, how do we deal with it? How do we find the capacity? So, like I said, we know that there are shippers, carriers, and brokers on this. Doesn't matter what you are. The key to finding additional capacity is carrier relationships, right? In our business, the way we look at it is we have two customers, all right? We have the shipper and the carrier, and in order to succeed, we have to take care of both. And our experience is that over the years, that if you take care of the carrier, that will make taking care of the customer so much easier. And really, that's my perspective, and my perspective is a non-asset-based 3PL, but that's not specific to our game. Shippers that operate this way often find themselves with fewer issues and times of the capacity shortage as well. So what does that mean? Let's delve into this a little bit. You want to become partners with the carriers you use, okay? Solid personal relationship based on respect, communication, cooperation. Again, not rocket science, but this is basically golden rule life terms. Treat people how you want to be treated, and just applying that simple tenet into your business dealings. Genuine concern for their interests. What does that look like? It means providing support 24/7. So you got a driver on the road and they're running into an issue. Having somebody that will answer their call and being able to help them out with their issue when you have that. That also means paying attention to wait times for the carriers and deadhead miles used, which may not mean as much to the shippers, but it's a huge cost drain for the carriers. So you know that, and you work that in, and you care about that, and you go to bat for your carriers when they're having these issues that affect their bottom line. Steady shipments in lanes they want. Get to know the lanes they want. Get to know, instead of looking at that carrier because they're doing a load from you from Memphis to Chicago and then not carrying after that, find out how often they're in Memphis, how often they're in Chicago, and then where they want to go once they get to Chicago and get empty, are they trying to get home? Are they trying to get to another load? Where are they trying to get to? What are you doing about it, and how can you help them? That's how you become a partner. Advance notice of upcoming shipments. In an ideal world, yes. A lot of times we're not as fortunate to have a bunch of advance notice, but whenever possible, be able to provide advance notice of upcoming shipments.
Kevin, if I could add something with that
Yep.
advance notice, with the ELD, as you mentioned, 12 days from now, it's going to become more and more important that we consider driver downtime. So if you think, if you think you're going to have a load on Monday, you want that guy at home on Sunday night.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and do different things, like you asked a week out. We might not know about loads a week ahead of time, but we can at least talk to the carriers a week ahead of time and find out where they're going to be. Okay. But anyway, moving forward, on-time payments, whether it doesn't matter if you're a shipper or you're a 3PL. We know that the carriers are not bankers. Okay, and they don't know the time value of money, and they're often just trying to make ends meet and be able to fill their fuel tank and make their insurance and truck payments. So we have to act accordingly, and we have to accommodate that, and we have to provide pay on time and provide them options for quick pay. Backhauls. It kind of goes back to what I said before, but find out where their extra capacity is, where their extra capacity is going, and try to help them out. High shipping volumes, lots of shipments. So the point there is that there are a lot of benefits, but also a lot of disadvantages to having only one carrier partner. And we're not here to give a dissertation on that. If you use multiple partners, though, what you want to do is keep that multiple partner list smaller and more defined, so you're not spreading your volume across too many carriers, right? Because the volumes that you can give those carriers you partner with, the ones you really trust, that will lead to loyalty. So basically what we're saying here is that there's a direct correlation between the loyalty the carriers will show the shippers and the freight volumes that they get tendered. Not rocket science again here, but it does bear mentioning. Expertise in the hazardous materials transportation. If you're a true partner with your carrier, then you can talk the language with them. You know what matters to them from a regulation standpoint, whether it's hazmat regulations or ELD regulations. You speak the language. The loyalty and the trust and the partnership comes from mutual respect of the stress points that each side have. So how do you pick the right partner or partners? Okay, picking a transportation partner. Honestly, there's a mental image that somebody in the middle, a middleman, is simply taking a cut of the action without adding any value. And there are times that is true, and there are times that is the furthest thing from the truth. Today's webinar isn't about the pros and cons of brokerage, so I'll leave that alone. But what I will say is this: when you're looking for a partner in hazmat, whether it is an asset-based carrier or a broker, a lot of the criteria are the same. So what are those criteria? First one's a high volume of hazmat loads. Okay, when you're vetting out a carrier partner, whether it is a carrier or broker, find out how much hazmat they truly do. One good rule of thumb is to have a quiz to kind of separate the contenders from the pretenders. That's a term I like to use. When somebody's asking for your freight, find out if they really know the hazmat market. Are they chasing any sort of opportunity they can get their hands on, or do they truly know what you do? Throw out terms like MSDS and CFR and see how they react. And you can tell pretty quickly if they can engage in conversation or if they act dumbfounded and start hemming and hawing. I have a friend that writes software, and he owns a company that writes software programs, and when he's looking to hire developers, his first line of defense is a quick 5-minute quiz that does largely the same thing. He asks them a few questions, open-ended questions, and you can tell pretty quickly if that person knows what they're talking about and knows that language based on the questions you ask. So when you're looking for a transportation partner and you want one,
we got a quick question, Kevin.
Yeah, sure.
So Jim Bierfeld, my buddy, has a question. He says, how are you as a 3PL finding carriers to work with?
That's an excellent question, Jim, and it's a chicken and egg relationship. I will say this: if you, as a 3PL, if you resort to using the load boards and the load boards only, as many do, you're going to fight a losing battle. So, our company specifically uses different software platforms and different census forms to be able to search carriers in different lanes with different certifications, and we go that way. When I say chicken or the egg, Jim, what I really mean is sometimes you have to find the load opportunity before you find the truck, and sometimes that's the best way to do it, and sometimes the best way to do it is find the truck, develop the relationship, and then go get the freight. And it's 6 of one and half dozen of the other. But what we try to do is, let's be honest, if you're a broker, you're going to use those load boards some, but you don't want to rely on them. Maybe you find them for one-off shipments, but for regular business, you want to go about it smarter, and there are software tools out there, software offerings that are able to go through DOT census data, and you can use that and mapping data and find carriers, and then it's almost like a sales pitch, finding a carrier, just like we have sales folks that are out there trying to find customers. Did I answer your question?
Let me just ask a quick question as a follow-up to that.
Sure.
Let me ask a quick question as a follow-up, Kevin. And so, you guys do a lot of hazmat loads. So, how often are the carriers finding you now versus you having to look, and contrast that with 10 years ago when you didn't have that?
So yeah, when we were starting out, there was more us finding them, and then over time, and certainly it doesn't happen overnight, right? But over time, you'll find that you start to develop relationships with carriers in the lanes that you operate. So now I think we can find that if a hazmat shipment comes on board, we have a list of probably 30 or 40 carriers that we can reach out to, that we know that we've used over and over and over again, and it's just a matter of, do they have assets there that day that will keep us in most lanes that we service from ever even going on the load board. But it doesn't happen overnight, right? It goes through trial and error. I mean, we've certainly had plenty of service failures along the way, and live and learn. Over time we've had to change and evolve our carrier vetting process because of that, and our ongoing vetting process because of that. Does that answer your question, Joe and Jim?
Hey, answers mine. I hope it answered Jim. If not, Jim, ask it away again. So.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So that was just about the high volume of hazmat loads when you're picking up. Okay. When you're vetting out your carrier partners, it's really trying to establish, do they have street credibility, as a lack of a better word? Can they talk the talk? And that, do they know what you're talking about? And their volume, you don't have to audit their volume, but almost, like a few questions can separate and tell you if they know if it's just somebody who's chasing any sort of freight opportunity or somebody that knows the space where you operate and can be a valued partner. If it is a non-asset-based partner, then you want to ask about their hazmat carrier network. The question you just asked me, Joe, is what a shipper should ask any potential freight partner. All right, are you a broker? You're a hazmat broker? Well, tell me about your carrier network. Tell me about and that goes to the next point, carrier management. How do you vet your carriers? On an onboarding level, how do you manage compliance on an ongoing level and talk about your procedures. You know, if you're just going after a regular asset-based carrier, you know, tell me about your training methods. Tell me about your driver qualifications. How often do your drivers do retraining? Are they HACCP certified? Are they NACD certified? Those are some of the questions we ask our asset-based partners. If you're a shipper and you're looking for asset-based partners, you should do the same. Disaster recovery experience. Ask about that. You know, that's another good vetting question. And again, it's for not just asset-based, but non-asset-based carriers. Tell me about open-ended question. Hey, tell me about a time when you had a chemical spill at a shipper or receiver. What did you do? What steps did you have to take? And you know that if they didn't mention a Chemtrek or a Chemtel or a similar type company, and if they didn't talk about having to file incident reports or corrective action reports, then you know they're full of BS, right? That's a vetting question. If they can't answer that and answer that off the cuff and just know the language, you know that that's not the right partner to be. Other questions, ask about their operations team and their experience and their knowledge of hazmat shipments and regulations. And then the last thing is technology. You know, tell me about your TMS. And again, this is not regulated with carrier partner, non-asset-based or asset-based carrier partner. Tell me about your TMS. What does it do as far as scorecarding the carriers? What does it do as far as scorecarding the drivers? Does it measure on-time percentage? Does it provide macro point visibility? Does it provide temperature? A lot of hazmat shipments are temperature sensitive. Does it provide temperature visibility? GPS. Does it allow you as a carrier partner or a shipper partner to be able to log in and be able to see status updates of your shipments? Those are the biggest things as far as what to look at in finding a good partner. So that's really what I have.
Excellent.
I appreciate everybody's time, and I'll certainly stay on to answer questions. But you know, if nothing else, I thank you for taking the time to listen, and hopefully you're able to learn something out of it.
That was excellent, Kevin. So guys, please use the chat feature there to ask questions. And if you think of a question later, you know, feel free to reach out to Kevin at either that phone number or that email. There's a question from Jim. Hang on. Jim asked, is the capacity crunch either worse or better for tanker trucks than for others? Oh, that's a good question.
You know, we primarily deal with non-tank trucks. I have some colleagues in the industry, and I'm led to believe it's about the same.
I'm guessing it's lane like all of it is.
You started to cut out, Joe. I didn't hear you. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Kevin, is it lane dependent?
There's always going to be lane dependency, whether there's a capacity crunch or not, right? There's always going to be areas where, and that's not tanker or flatbed, refrigerated van, it doesn't matter. There are always pockets of areas where it's always going to be tight, and there are always other pockets, even a capacity crunch, where they're always going to be easy to find trucks, and that's not necessarily has anything to do with capacity crunch as much as just shipping volumes out of those geographic areas.
I keep hearing everyone who's telling me about drop loads or missed loads this last month or so. It's all been specialized equipment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's others, but that's what I hear the most about.
It is across the board, but
Kevin?
anytime it's specific, you know, anytime you get more specific needs, you know, not just the hazmat, but you talk about, you know, trucks with lift gates, the more specialized equipment you get, you know, the more that the capacity crunch is going to affect you, and you're going to get, when there's drop shipments, it's harder to cover.
We get a question here. It says, how about the fee to ship hazmat over the road? And that's a question from Charles.
The fee?
Yeah. I'm not so
I can't
sure
see
what
the
you're
C.
getting at,
Yeah.
Charles. Could you elaborate? All right. Hang on. Another question from Jenny also. Okay, so the toll for bridge crossings is what
The tolls.
Charles is asking. And before I get to that, I get a note here from Jenny saying thank you. And needing to leave would be great to get a copy of the presentation recording. So what we'll do is we're going to post the recording along with a short article about this, and we will send a link to all of you in email. So for toll and bridge crossings, if you could answer that question.
So yes, the fees are generally higher with tolls, not just bridges, but toll roads are higher with hazmat shipments as well. So that goes back to that's another reason that the capacity crunch is affected more in hazmat than just it's affected everywhere, but that's just yet another reason why it's affected more in the hazmat realm.
Okay, then I think I hope that answered your question, Charles. And then we got another question here from Carla saying about procedures for hazmat. Is there special guidelines for newbies? Well, I think this was part of it, Carla. Maybe that's something Kevin could follow up with you offline on.
Yeah, Carla, if you want to reach out to me offline, and then whoever had asked about the Transport Topics article about the DOT testing, I'm more than happy to share.
That was Kathy. I got her email.
Okay, I'm more than happy to share. The data that we used is all public. So reach out to me offline, and as far as newbies go, like Lion Technology, for example, that's an education company in the space that they do the hazmat, the written tests and the trainings. Right. So, but yeah, I'm more than happy to share any of the sources that we use for this offline.
Well, this is excellent, Kevin. Thank you, and thank everybody for coming. Any last questions, real quick, or follow up with Kevin? And there's his phone number. And Kevin, you want any closing comments?
No, I just thank everybody for your time, and again, don't hesitate to reach out for me for any comments or questions afterwards, and that's my contact information on there.